Welcome to Waking the Why, a podcast about uncovering the purpose behind life's crucible moments. Each episode, you'll hear from real people who turn their struggles into strength and their stories into light. If you're searching for meaning, walking through something hard, or just love stories that stir the soul, you're in the right place. Hello, friends, and welcome to Waking the Why, where we discover the purpose behind life's crucible moments. My name is Stacey Peterson, and our guest today is Nic Bittle. Nic, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, everyone, I'll say the first time I met Nic, I don't think it was the NICA convention. It might have been like our NICA annual meeting here. He is a phenomenal speaker. His stories are so engaging, so much so that Josh and I, my business partner at Windward, decided to have him come and speak to our leadership team. And of all of the individuals that have come and spoken, our team still talks about the principles that Nic taught them that day. And so, Nic, I'm so grateful for you and your influence on me and the rest of our leadership team.
Thank you.
So to start, why don't you just tell us your story? Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to doing what you do today.
You bet. Well, thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, my story. People always ask me, how in the world do you become a professional speaker? And I always tell them, it's a series of bad decisions. And I think a lot of us figure out what we're supposed to do in life through a series of bad decisions. But I grew up. I live in Western Oklahoma. I grew up on a farm. We worked. My dad worked. My brother and I, man, he worked us. And I knew I didn't want to farm. And so I went to college at College of the Ozarks in Branson, Missouri, to get a degree in hotel restaurant management. It's kind of a business degree with a hospitality emphasis. And I'm not sure why. I think I wanted to be a concierge in a big city hotel. And I don't know where I got that. If I wanted to be the king of the $100 handshake, if you need a submarine to go down a river and pop up and spray 7 Up on 3 nuns, I wanted that to take about 2 calls.
Oh my gosh.
But we make plans, God laughs. So I get into college and I finish my degree. And sometime during college, I got the buzz to be my own boss. In college, I started the snow cone stands and I ran those during the summer. And then when I got out of college, I got married. My wife and I met in the 7th grade. I opened up an ice cream store, Marble Slab Creamery ice cream store. And then I opened up another one. And then I got into the restaurant business and opened up a franchise in Oklahoma City. It was the third busiest store in the nation. Opened up another one in a really high profile location. This was maybe 22 years ago. And lost everything. Lost over $1 million in less than 6 months. Had to fire 150 employees right before Christmas. And those employees lost their jobs not because of anything they'd done wrong, but because of mistakes I had made. So then I find myself with a baby and broke. We were actually forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is liquidation, sell everything. Well, you feel, I'm sure I was depressed. And I finally got to that point where it's like, okay, God, what I've been trying to do, because all I was trying to do was get rich. I was just chasing money. I didn't love the restaurant business. It was just an opportunity. It's like what I've been trying to do is not working. You open the door, I'll walk through it. And I was getting up every morning, I don't know, at 4 a.m., and I was just reading. And I was reading the Bible, but I was also reading anything else I could get my hands on. And I remember I read this book. I think it was called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. And in that book, they talk about bright spots. And one of the examples they gave is, if you're a married couple and you're not getting along, if they say, where's the bright spot? If for 23 hours and 45 minutes, I can't stand this person, what's the 15 minutes where you get along? That's the bright spot. And they say, well, when we're drinking coffee in the mornings, we get along great. And they're like, okay, well, duplicate that bright spot. Now, instead of doing it 15 minutes in the morning, do it 15 minutes in the morning and create that same environment 15 minutes in the evening and fill your life with bright spots. And I remember thinking, I wonder if that works with a career. If anyone who's ever had significant failure in their life, you forget all of the good. You only focus on the failure. I'd done a lot of stuff that was right, but all I remembered was going broke, letting everybody down, feeling like a failure. And boy, that's a vicious cycle. And I remember a bright spot in my career. a couple of years before everything went away in the restaurant business, I was invited to speak at a commencement address at my old alma mater, Corn Bible Academy. It was a 20-minute keynote, and I don't know what I said, but I was like, I loved it. And it's like, if I could do anything, if I had a blank sheet of paper and could do anything, I would be a professional speaker. And so that was kind of the moment that I decided this is what I want to do with my life. It wasn't about the money, it was really about trying something on that finally fit, that felt right. Now, wanting to be a professional speaker and becoming one, that was a journey in itself. I spoke for 5 years before I ever got paid.
Right.
But but yeah, finally the right person was in the audience, and it opened the doors to the career I have now. And if you'd have given me a blank sheet of paper when I got started, I could not have created this life, career, and the impact I get to have.
Isn't it amazing how our life's experiences kind of guide us in a way that we don't even realize where it's leading us at times, right? And I don't know about you, but at times, like, I want to plan it all out and I want to know what it's going to be and I want to execute to that plan. And sometimes there's other plans that I may not be aware of. I want to bounce back a little bit to when you find yourself at the point of having to shut down your business, right?
Yeah.
Not only are you losing this money, but now you're having to let 150 employees go. And I remember, I mean, I started my career in HR, and ebbs and flows in business and market and economy has kind of always been part of my job. And I take it very seriously when we impact people's lives. In the end, you still have to make the business decision, right? And so it wasn't until the first time that I had to lay off employees within my own company where I realized the full weight of it. So maybe talk us through that a little bit of how do you get to that like decision point, and how do you go about that and your approach to your employees during that time?
I mean, that's a great question. I probably didn't think about it at the time. Now I work with a lot of clients like yourself and other companies across the country, and having to fire somebody because it's good for the business is a harder decision than having to do what I did, which was everybody, it's like Oprah.
Right.
Everybody gets fired, because I did. I got fired. I mean, I wasn't getting paid anything. I was going broke. I'm the one who carried the debt, so I didn't have the guilt I probably should have had when I made decisions that, cost everybody their jobs, and so, I haven't really reflected on that much, but thanks for that. I will really start to dig into that some more,
You
but
know, Nick, go back and figure no. You know what? I think what's interesting about it, at least for me, is just what it taught me of you still have to make those tough decisions, but the way in which we choose to part ways with another human being, we can do it in a way that is respectful, as best as we can. We can't control their reactions. And I will tell you, the employees that I had to let go were just, they were a gift to me. In how they handled that situation. But I will say it is so much easier to be a solopreneur where the only person you're impacting is yourself, than when you go out on a limb and you start your own business and you've got all of these employees and their family and your own family. It's definitely a path that's, not for the faint of heart. That's for sure. Because, I'm a person of faith, and I'm a person that believes that if God gives you an impression, there for sure should be a way to make it happen. And my what I've learned is that, yeah, there's a way. It's not easy and it's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be ups and downs and hardships, and because that's the way we learn. Right.
yeah. No, you're exactly right, and, when I have looked back and reflected on what really went wrong, it was I put off making the right hard
Mhm.
decision. I should have let somebody go sooner,
Yeah.
and instead I dismissed it, I forgave it, I made excuses on why I shouldn't get rid of that person, and then because of that, everything collapsed. It's ultimately my fault.
Yeah.
But if I would have been willing to make a harder decision sooner, have harder conversations sooner, then it probably would have been a different story. And, we made plans and God laughs, but so I'm glad I'm where I'm at.
Yeah.
But
Well,
now I yeah, now I do a lot of workshops on how to have those hard conversations that I failed to have.
that's exactly what I was just gonna say, is that it's because of your life's experiences that you're now in a situation to influence and guide those clients that you work with, whether you're, doing direct consulting or whether you're speaking to a crowd. You have experience, and I really believe that God gives us experiences, one, for us to learn, but two, then to turn around and take those experiences and help others along their path, right?
Yeah, I think it's rarely just for us.
So you said that you want to be a speaker, but wanting it and becoming one are two totally different things. So help us understand kind of what that path looks
Yeah.
like for you.
Right. So yeah, wanting to be a professional speaker, boy, it sounds good on paper. Getting somebody to pay you to
Right.
run your mouth, that is incredibly hard. And and I found a mentor early on. His name's Mark LeBlanc. He's out of Minneapolis, and he was the president of the National Speakers Association, and he's got a long list of initials behind his name. And I told him before. I said, "This is the hardest business I've ever done because always before I was selling a product or a service.
Mhm.
In my world, I'm selling me."
Yes.
And that level of rejection, it just cuts deeper. When someone critiques, your product, that's about your product. But when you get off the stage and they critique you, man, that one cuts deep. And there's been so many turning points in this career. But one of the things that I did, I spoke for 5 years for free. And I just took any job, any audience that would listen, I would speak. And I wrote my first little book, Small Business Big Mistakes, and it was about the success and failures of being your own boss. And it's not even in print anymore, but I would go and I'd sell 2 books to an audience, and I'd come home with $30, like I'd done something. And I was welding on the side to pay the bills. And I quit 100 times. And my wife, Tarina, she knew this is what God wanted me to do with my life, and she made me start 101. And I remember I'd been invited to speak. Let's see, it was the Oklahoma Society of Association Executives. So this is an association for everyone who runs an association. And they had a the end of year thing. The governor was going to be there. They needed somebody to be the keynote. They didn't have a budget. I showed up, put on my suit, and gave the best 45 minutes I had. And I remember we were so broke, we couldn't afford to pay attention back then. And they brought me up on stage and thanked me and had me a little gift basket. And I'm just praying that there's a Applebee's gift card in there or something I can take home because we were so broke. And there was a pin set and some golf tees. And I'm like, I I can't eat golf tees. And I wanted to quit. And I remember I walked to the car in the rain and it was just pouring. And it was just one of those deals. I just broke down in the car. And I was like, I'm done. This isn't it. God is a closed door. I can't do this. In that room was a guy named David Finley, and he was the association executive for the sheet metal world for SMACNA. And he reached out and basically said, "Hey, we're doing an annual conference here in 6 months, and we want to pay you to come do 3 hours." So it's like, well, my first really paid gig, but I had to wait 6 months to do it. And so it's like, well, okay, God, I'll do this for 6 more months, but then I'm done. That opened the door to the career I have today. Because I went and I did those 3 hours, and it was all about personal success and failure and overcoming failure. And it was all professional development stuff. But David pulled me aside afterwards, and after I delivered those 3 hours, and he said, "Nick, I want you to come work with our apprentices." He said, "Our apprentices don't look at this as a career. They look at what they're doing as a job, and they need some help. They need some communication training. They need some professional development, some professionalism." And I said, "Man, that's not what I do. I don't even know what a sheet metal worker is."
Right.
And he said, "Well, you don't need to know. I don't need you to teach them how to balance a heat and air unit. I need you to teach them how to show up and build a career." And I turned him down. I said no.
Oh,
As
wow.
stupid as I was, because I think sometimes we get so focused on this is the plan
Yeah.
that I have, just like you said.
Yeah.
And I told him no, and thank goodness David's one of the best people in my life now, but he called me back 2 weeks later, and he said, "Let's
Oh,
go to lunch again."
good for him.
And he said, "Nick, you really need to consider this." He said, "We have a need and we have a budget." And it was like, "Okay, now you're speaking
Right.
my language." And I even told myself, "This is the profile of a good sale, but this is not a long-term career." I tried to talk myself out of it then, but it's like, I'm gonna walk through this door because I need the check. And so I did. I started working with the apprentices in the sheet metal local in Oklahoma City, and I'd work with them once a quarter, and we'd talk about professionalism and entrepreneurship and self-leadership, communication, and then pretty soon I started hearing stories about how their foreman, their bosses were just they were great sheet metal workers, they weren't great leaders. And I came to David and I said, "David," I said, "you really need to find somebody to teach these guys how to be leaders." And he
Man,
said,
that's so
"I think I
good.
already have." And I said, "I can't do that." I said, "I've never ran a big crew. I've never built a hotel or a casino." And he said, "I don't need you to." He said, "I need somebody that understands people." And he said, "You've had teams. You speak the language." And he said, "But you're engaging." And he said, "These guys will listen to you," because he said their BS meter is on point. And he said, "If you don't connect with them right away, you're gonna lose them." And he said, "You know how to do that."
And
And
testify you do. You
well,
are so good at that. It's interesting what our limiting beliefs do, right?
yeah,
They get in the way of the path we're on or the path that we should be taking. Ah, I love it.
so fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Nick, you do have to share my favorite story. And
Okay, which one's that?
it's the why you chose as a family to live where you live, and then about your son.
Okay.
It's been, you know what one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'll tell that one.
Do
The
it.
coffee shop.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I will tell that one. So I currently live in a little town of 503 people called Corn, Oklahoma, spelled just like the vegetable. It's out here in western Oklahoma. I always tell people this is where God makes the tornadoes. He test drives them through Corn America, and then if they're a good one, he'll send them to Moore, Oklahoma, or up to Kansas. But we live. This is kind of where we grew up. Tarina and I were living in Oklahoma City. We lived there for about 15 years. When the kids were 6 and 8, we wanted to move back to Corn America because we wanted to raise the kids on a farm and in a small community. And there's a little Christian school down here we graduated from. We wanted them to go to, and so we moved to Corn America. And Corn's got nothing. We don't have a gas station. There's not a Walmart supercenter. There's not a Dollar General. There's a Dollar General on the moon. There's not one in Corn, Oklahoma. But we do have a post office that's open from noon to 4. And we do have a cafe that's open all day Thursday, Friday, Saturday, lunch on Sunday. And when we moved to Corn, Oklahoma, kids were 6 and 8, and there's a few things that I love about Corn, Oklahoma. Number one, my kids could ride their bikes all around town. I didn't have to worry about them because if and when they did something stupid, we would hear about it because everybody's got our cell phone number. That's accountability. That's how you develop accountability in our children, and so we love that about Corn. The other thing we loved about Corn is this is where we grew up, and our family farms down here, and we wanted our kids to know after school and on weekends there's something to do. We wanted them to develop a work ethic because right now we're seeing a group of individuals enter the workforce, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them have never worked before. Now we're putting them on our jobs and we're expecting them to work 8 or 10 or 12 hours. And they look at us like a dog in a new world. It's like, what is this?
Yeah.
The other thing I love about Corn, Oklahoma is most of the people there, not all of them, most of them, they say what they mean what they say. They tell you something, you can take it to the bank. They believe their handshake's worth more than their signature. And that's that integrity piece that's lacking in so many people in our country. And we wanted all of that for them. But one of the things, Cruz, I said they were 6 and 8, they were 7 and 8 when we moved. But Cruz was 7 years old. Now Cruz, he's a little mini me, but his favorite thing in the world's breakfast. Not his favorite meal, his favorite thing in the world. I mean, you give this kid an option between Christmas and breakfast, he's like, "Breakfast, daddy." He loved breakfast. And he's also an early riser. He thinks anything after 5:30 in the morning is a complete waste of time, and he's always wanted to get up and do stuff. That first weekend we were there, I was actually in Oakland, California, doing a bunch of workshops for a contractor, and I was coming home on a Friday night, and I had a layover in Las Vegas, and it was about 9 o'clock at night Central Time at home, and so I called my wife and kids, tell them good night. It was going to be midnight before my flight landed. It'd be about 2 a.m. before I pulled in the drive, and little Cruz gets on the phone. He said, "Hey, Daddy, we gonna have breakfast in the morning?" I said, "Yeah, buddy, we'll have breakfast." He said, "All right, I'll get you up at 5:30. I said, "Don't you dare get me up at 5:30. I said, "I'm coming from West Coast time. You are in Central Time." I said, "I'm not going to land in Oklahoma City till midnight. It's going to be 2 a.m. before I pull in the drive." I said, "Let's go have breakfast at 7:30 or 8 when normal people eat breakfast on a Saturday." He said, "Oh, Daddy, that'll never work." I said, "Actually, it works really well." He said, "But Daddy, we got to get there when they open." I said, "No, you don't have to get there when they open. We just have to get there before they stop serving breakfast." I mean, have you ever tried to argue with a 7-year-old?
Right.
Doesn't work. I finally drew a hard line in the sand and I said, "No more." I said, "We're not going at 5:30 in the morning. So get that idea out of your head." Well, he got real quiet on the other end of the phone. He said, "Well, Daddy, I just go by myself." I said, "Really? You're going to go by yourself?" He said, "I'll do it by myself." And I said, "I think that's a pretty good idea." Well, he hands the phone to Mama. He runs off to bed. Now, Mama was listening to about half of our conversation. And she said, "What did you just tell our little man he could do?" I said, "Oh, sweetheart, don't worry about it." She said, "You can't let a 7-year-old go to the cafe by himself." I said, "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think he's going to do this." She said, "Dadgum good and well, he's going to do this. And you just gave him permission." Have you ever tried to argue with your spouse?
Right.
That don't work either.
Uh-uh.
My flight was boarding. I jumped on the airplane. I landed in Oklahoma City. I pulled in the drive about 2 a.m. I don't think my head hit the pillow. All of a sudden, I hear Cruz's alarm clock going off down the hall. I look down the hall. I see lights start shining underneath his bedroom door.
My goodness.
I hear him sliding open his dresser drawers. I hear him shaking his piggy bank. And I'm like, this kid's going to do this? Now, Trina, she's got the boniest elbow on the planet. And she's working over my short ribs. She's like, "Hey, this was your idea. You get up and take care of it." And I said, "Sweetheart, let's just see what happens." See, I knew 5:45 is the moment of truth. At 5:45, that little man's going to open the front door and he's going to look outside. What's he going to see at 5:45 in the morning? It's dark. It's dark. It's so early the moon's not even out.
Right.
Right? And little kids are afraid of the dark.
And older kids.
Yeah, we all are. So I'm like, this isn't a problem. And sure enough, 5:45 comes. You can hear him walk to the front door real slow. You can hear him open the front door real slow. Trina and I, we're laying in bed. We are wide awake. Cruz takes one step outside, closes the door behind him. He is gone. Now Trina is freaking out. I said, "Sweetheart, if there's a problem, Susan will call us. Susan owned the cafe." I just didn't want to get out of bed.
Right.
So later that morning, I went down to the cafe. As soon as I walked in, Susan looked at me. Now, Corn Cafe is like any small town cafe in the country. In the middle of the cafe is about 6 tables all pushed together. And it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Who's sitting around those tables? It's the old guys, right? It's the old guys sitting around the table, drinking coffee. They're telling lies, right? Same lies they told last week. This week they're bigger. They've developed them. Later that morning, I walked in the cafe. As soon as I walked in, Susan looked at me. She said, "Nick almost called you this morning." I said, "No, I'm surprised you didn't."
Right.
She said, "This morning, your little man walked in like he owned the place, pulled up a chair right there with those old guys." She said it was the first time every one of those old guys shut up at the exact same time. Then my little 7-year-old Cruz looked up at Susan. He ordered a short stack of pancakes, scrambled eggs, side of bacon, and a cup of coffee. And he started drinking coffee with those old guys. And he went down there. He went down there for the next 7 years.
That's amazing.
And I always ask my audience, I'm like, pop quiz, is he learning something from those old guys? Absolutely. He's learning some stuff he's not old enough to understand,
Right.
but he's learning some stuff. And, we throw the word mentorship around a lot in our business, but mentorship happens a whole lot more over a cup of coffee or a Coke than it does a set of plans or a workbook. It's about relationships. And that's something that little man taught me. And now he's graduating high school. Can't believe it's been that long. I get to give his commencement address
Oh,
this weekend, so I'm looking forward to that.
I love it. I can hear that story over. I think I've heard it probably 5 times already, but I'm not kidding you. I just love it because I can picture what's happening, and I can picture these old guys sitting there engaging with this, young boy and probably watching themselves maybe a little bit more, but also imparting wisdom. Like I love the whole scene of it. It's
Well,
amazing.
thanks. When I go out and work with new hires and apprentices, I will ask them, was Cruz welcome? And they always say, "Oh, yeah, they loved having him there," but it's like, "No, they didn't." He cramped their style, they had to watch what they said a little bit, when they started giving him relationship advice, they had to tone some of that down. And what I'll tell new hires and apprentices is don't wait for an invitation. It's okay to just show up uninvited.
Love it,
They
which is
come
so hard to do.
Oh, it's so hard, takes so much courage, and, little seven-year-old Cruz, and I actually interviewed him on our podcast, and I said, "What motivated you?" He said, "Dad, I just wanted breakfast." And he said he was scared to death, but he just wanted breakfast.
Oh my heck,
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Nick, one last question. Life's hard. Sometimes we don't realize we're about to hit or enter into a hard period. And when we're done with the hard period, we can look back and gain so much. But when we're in the middle of the hard, sometimes we don't even think we're going to make it, right? You've had your fair share of hard, your fair share of middle. What advice would you give to our audience about the times when they're in the middle?
I mean, it's tough, and it's tough, and you get out, and it's like, "Oh, that wasn't that bad," and it was horrible. I think, and I know this podcast is all about finding your why and that purpose, and I think that is so important. And I was actually speaking to a group of high school students the other day, high school seniors, and they're trying to figure that out because we often get career and purpose intertwined, and what does that look like? And one individual said, "I feel like I've been told I gotta follow my passion. Whatever I'm passionate about, chase that." And I'm like, "Well, but there's some people who are very passionate about singing and they're not any good at it." So passion alone, I mean, if you don't think so, turn on American Idol or whatever singing show is on. There's some very passionate people about singing. They're horrible. And so I said, "Well, you could look at what you're passionate about, but we also need to look for what am I good at?" But that's probably not enough because if you're passionate about something and you're good at it, it doesn't necessarily mean you can make a living at it. And so what I did for those seniors, I drew 3 circles on the board and they all overlapped in the middle. And I said, "I want you to figure out what you're passionate about. What really fuel drives you? And what are you good at? What comes easy for you that's hard for others? And then what is the market willing to pay for?" I was passionate about small business. I was pretty good at small business. When I got started as a speaker, I thought I'm going to help anybody start a business and grow a business. And what I found out real quick is nobody who's an entrepreneur and is starting a business for the first time in their life is going to hire somebody like me to tell them what they're doing wrong because those kids already know everything. It wasn't until I found a market that found me. Finding your purpose or your why, it's not a secret combination, but don't sit on the sidelines. Get out there, do it. The only reason I'm doing what I'm doing today is because my wife kicked me in the rear and said, "You can't quit." It was just keep staying out there, get out. And it's hard because when you're in the middle, you're usually depressed and you feel like everybody's life is easy but yours. And you're the only one that's dealing with this. And let me tell you, the more vulnerable I was on stage, the more open I was about my failures. People would come up to me and be like, "Holy cow, I went through that same thing." And so you're not alone, but don't sit on the sidelines. Get out there, do something, fail, figure out what doesn't work, and the right thing will find you.
Nick, I love it. Thank you so much for being here. Well, my
Thanks
friends,
for
you heard Nick say it. Don't sit on the sidelines and just realize that if you are making series of bad decisions, it's all good, right? God can use those decisions to lead you to your passion that you're good at, that there's a market for. So just don't ever get up. And then also remember, don't forget the bright spots. I love that point that Nic taught us today. So find the bright spots in those moments of your life and focus there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining me on Waking the Why. If today's story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget, your why is worth waking up for.